Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, listeners of all ages, the date is November the 17th, 2020. The place, the internet. You are listening to adults talk about cool stuff. This is ATACS Spoilercast Ghost of Tsushima Edition. I'm your host, Paul from Atlanta, and joining me is Mr. Flex from Raleigh, North Carolina. Hello, Flex. How are you?
Hello, I have all the headbands.
Excellent. Mr. Alex from Cary, North Carolina. Do you have all the headbands?
I don't. I'm still composing haiku. Sorry.
Excellent. Mr. Nate, I understand you are a haiku expert out of Clayton, North Carolina.
Sure, yes. I definitely did not wander past haiku spots in this game multiple times and say, yeah, it's not worth it.
So, Mr. Ryan, did you ever wander past a haiku and not really embrace your inner artist?
I'm bad at haiku, so.
Well, haikus are part of what we are here to talk about today. Mostly, we're talking about Ghost of Tsushima, where you are Mr. Ghost from Tsushima, and it's published by Sony, developed by Sucker Punch. Came out back over in the summer. We've all played it. We've all had some various thoughts about it, and we're here to talk to you about what our thoughts have been. So the
And there will be spoilers.
And there will be spoilers. That's kind of the point of the spoiler cast. We're going to talk about all sorts of stuff, plot points, gameplay, any twists and turns that we think are interesting. So if you haven't picked this game up and you are afraid of being spoiled on it, then you should go and play the game and then come back and listen to us. So to start with, it is an open world type game that starts out in the way a lot of open world type games do, which is an unskippable scene at the very beginning where there is a lot of activity. You are on a horse, and if you're like me, you don't know you can control that horse until you are already getting damaged from other horses. That intro scene took me a minute to realize what I was supposed to be doing. They do give you a couple of cinematic ways to be awesome in that first 2 minutes or so, where you can cut through some bad dudes as Mongols are invading your home island, and then after that, no matter what you do, you get blown up and you fade to black, and then the game itself proper sort of starts after that. The game's set in 1274. A real historical event, the Mongol invasion of the Japanese island of Tsushima. So this is based off of history, but the historical parallels pretty much stop there. It is interesting. It's fascinating, and it is definitely an open world game of the openest of worlds. So I have not played too many open world games, so my patience for a lot of those systems was probably thicker than most people's. But wow, there's a lot of stuff on that map, guys.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that that you haven't played a lot of open world games because this Ghost of Tsushima kind of doesn't stand out in my mind quite as much as other open world games. And that's not to say I didn't enjoy it, but I did find myself very quickly like feeling like, okay, I've got the idea of this mechanic, like especially like the map collectible stuff, right? Like here's a shrine climb, here's a haiku, here's a follow a fox, here's a Mongol camp, I guess this game's version of bandit camps, and like I found that those mechanics were interesting a handful of times, but like most open world games, you end up doing them like, why do it 3 times when you can do it like 20 times, right? So, Sony has, there are a lot of other open world games that I have played, and even some of them are Sony titles like Horizon Zero Dawn and Spider-Man, among others, and like. I don't want to dive into this right the first thing. I think we should talk about what makes this game interesting and what it does do well, perhaps first. But, I was curious when I was playing it, I was like, am I just jaded on this type of game? Or is it because like maybe Ghost of Tsushima would have been better as like not an open world game. Like there were definitely times I felt like, maybe
Yeah.
like a wide linear design where they didn't repeat some of the gameplay, the little mini games like 15 times would have been a bit more fitting. So,
Yeah,
but
I
I
mean,
digress.
to that general point about it, as it stands within the open world genre, it is a very particular type of open world game that is of the Assassin's Creed lineage. Like you could make, let's say, less than 5 fairly minor changes to this game and call it Assassin's Creed Tsushima, and it would pretty much fit.
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring that up, and that's kind of where I was going with my patience comment. The last Assassin's Creed game that I played was Brotherhood, so that's how far up to date I am on that series. So if like I hear Ryan's point, and I think I'd probably be right in that sort of similar boat with him, except for the fact that I've really not played any of these titles this entire last generation. So I was ready for some map icons, but it still got to the point where there's a lot of icons and a lot of camps out there, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of, I feel like, have to go into this game knowing what it is. I think I lean a little bit more towards Ryan and I haven't even played many Assassin's Creed games specifically, but, and I guess I should also say up front, I'm not the biggest open world person in general, but even with some of the open world games I have played, including stuff like Horizon and Spider-Man that Ryan mentioned, it's like you get to that point where you're like, okay, I'm going to clear some camps. I'm going to, chase down some icons, and kind of that loop is pretty well-worn territory. And, I can guess we can dig into the good and bad of that, but I'm not sure. I feel like Tsushima did much new or novel or like kind of stand out in that area. Like I think it does a lot of generally good stuff and it doesn't do anything terrible, but I'm not sure it does anything great either. Like in that open world space, at least.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe as we break down or as we look at some of the individual elements too, like it's like you said, Flex, like I mean, other open world games that I think have done it better, maybe there's something about the genre that lended itself to, like maybe some systemic gameplay or like something about the environments that really lended itself to like an open world experience. Whereas I feel like with Tsushima, it didn't deliver that often. Once or twice, but maybe not enough to justify the whole structure.
Yeah,
So,
and as far as that structure goes, the game fairly quickly gets you off that initial battlefield and gets you introduced into the world, and almost at the very beginning, the game is giving you this sort of like flashing light of, hey, you're a samurai and you just got completely wrecked on this beach by all these Mongols. In fact, there's a hilarious scene where this samurai walks up and he's like, I challenge you. And then the Khan just throws oil on him and sets him on fire, which made me laugh. That tells you what you need to know about my personality. But very shortly after that, the game fades to black, and then you sort of come to you've been rescued, and you don't know who your rescuer is right off. You find out it's a thief, who is the exact opposite of what a samurai is supposed to be, and she sort of leads you through your very first stealth section of the game to get you introduced into the world. So very quickly the game shows you the samurai combat, shows you the stealth sequence, and because you kind of got wrecked as a samurai, well, that's where you start down the path of being this like stealthy guy who's the anti-samurai. And looking back on it, it was kind of interesting to me how they fairly quickly introduced those two sort of gameplay styles, and they already sort of were narratively trying to sell you on one over the other. And I thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah, that was definitely a balance through the whole game, and narratively as well, as like Jin's whole turn to being more stealthy and using, unhonorable techniques and such. I do think I, in general, liked the stealth, and for the most part, liked the combat. It's fairly generic like, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but like, I mean, it's pretty standard stuff, but like, I think they executed it well enough. I think did tend to use more stealth, maybe later on in the game as I got stronger and like had all my armor upgraded and my sword upgraded and all that stuff. I probably, my patience started wearing out and I would just start charging into forts, and especially once you get the ghost tools like more upgraded, which we can dig into those at some point because those are fun. But yeah, I mean, definitely early game, I used a lot of stealth, and I'm kind of curious from all of you, like, did you find yourself like doing more stealth versus direct combat, or did you do a mix, or like, I guess I'm wondering, did you have like a strong preference one way or the other?
Yeah, I'm gonna go last here. So, Alex, you've been kind of quiet. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what your play style was? Were you more stealthy, or were you more samurai-y?
Yeah, I started out being more samurai because I wasn't sure narratively, because they were trying to position it where uh, doing the stealth thing is bad, and I wasn't sure if this was sort of a choice that you could make that would impact how the ending would be. So as I realized that it didn't really matter, then and you started to get more of those ghost tools, the gameplay started to open up. It just became the path of least resistance for me to do more of the stealth. It was a lot easier for me to just jump on roofs and then stab guys through the head. So I ended up doing more of the stealthy stuff towards like the latter 2/3 of the game.
Interesting. So that's like kind of the opposite of what I did.
Ryan, what about you? Did you have a similar experience, or did you run that game differently?
Well, it's kind of funny. So just as a side note, Alex was wondering or talking about like the possibility, because it is such a strong narrative theme that I also wondered that for a while. But I remember in one of the sections where you're fighting alongside, I think Shimura. Oh no, we lost Nate there.
Hopefully we'll get him back. We can continue.
All right. Yeah, so you're fighting alongside Shimura, and I remember at that point, like in the middle of that battle, I went into ghost mode and just like started like butchering dudes left and right, and he was like, "Your form is so awesome!" Like, he's just like shouting compliments at you. So just that cracked me up that happened. But I think my experience might have been somewhat similar to Alex's, and that and one of the things, Paul, you talked about some of the opening segments. Actually, after you get defeated on the beach and then you meet up with Yuna, then you actually, like, I guess Jin kind of goes and like charges the Mongol fort, and it teaches you the standoff mechanic,
Right.
which is kind of this neat, unique thing that the game does, and like trying to fit that samurai cinema veneer. And so I actually would try to approach some of the camps early on by like using a standoff to get a couple of quick kills, and then just kind of like charging in, guns a-blazing, and like just go straight melee. Because early on, yeah, your stealth is a bit tricky to pull off, and you don't really have like any upgrades to help you with it. So like, and the enemies don't have much armor either, so you can like just kind of go in and go like, but then later on they give the enemies like more armor and like some tougher, they'll have shields and they'll have different weapon types, and like it. I played the game on normal difficulty, so it wasn't like the combat was super hard and you could pull it off, but if you ran into the middle of, and the later camps were just huge too. So like if you just kind of charged into the center of one of those and got zerged by like a million Mongols, like all wearing armor, like you could go down like, if you messed up a couple of dodges and blocks, you could get kind of like zerged. So as I got better stealth tools, I did shift a bit more towards like starting out with chain assassinations and backstabs and stuff like that, and just kind of like trying to use that for partly for efficiency.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and it's funny because I think my experience was the exact opposite of everyone so far, which is for me, I have a historical distaste for stealth games. Um, as long as there are no witnesses, there's no one to tell the story. It's stealthy. Um, so, so when this game first started, I, like you guys, thought that there was going to be some narrative consequence, whether or not you were a samurai or you were doing stealth kills and dishonorable in air quotes stuff. So I said, no, that's fine. I'm going to run right to that Mongol camp and I'm going to kill two guys with a standoff and just murder them. And that that worked for actually longer than I thought it would. I'm sure that we'll talk about this here in a minute, but I spent a ton of time running around Act 1, scrounging every piece of ore, every supply, every metal. I upgraded everything I had. So for a bit, I felt like I was over leveled and I could do that. But as you played the game, and I don't know if you guys noticed this or not only did the enemies get tougher, but they actually narrowed the timing windows for a lot of stuff that you would do for a standoff or for whenever you're, battling in the open. So the game itself forced you to take more of a stealth kill kind of role as you got further in the acts, and I absolutely revolted against that because that's not how I wanted to play. So some of those later camps, I was running around in a circle exploiting the AI because by God, I'm going to kill them honorably, even though I probably should just realize I'm just running in a circle exploiting the AI. But that's how I wanted to play the game, and I was a little disappointed that by the time that you got into Act 3, especially, the gameplay almost forces you into a stealth role for some of those later camps or even the story encounters.
Yeah,
Um,
I think in some ways they kind of like there's a couple of things in play here. One, I do think they tried to force you that way because the narrative was Jin, slowly resorting to more and more unhonorable, stealthy, whatever you want to call them, techniques. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was some intention to kind of force you, the player, to try and consider more of those tools on your own. I also think maybe for me, I became actually more daring, but I also stopped doing like the bigger side Mongol camps and other things. So like I maybe wasn't doing the most challenging stuff in the back half of the game. And I also used a lot of tools that I think were meant to be stealth tools in very unstealthy offensive ways. So like I would always start like slinking into areas like stealthy, get your quick like triple stealth kill or whatever. But I would be a little less, shy about breaking stealth. So I just start like shooting arrows, headshotting people. And if someone saw it, oh well, I'll throw sticky bombs and I'll throw kunai and I'll kind of like dodge around and like use all those like ghost weapons, but just kind of using them out in the open, if that makes sense. Which in some ways is like probably not how they imagine people using all that stuff, but I also found those weapons to just be really powerful. So,
Right.
and there's an armor that you could recover health somehow. I forget exactly what it was, but there was some combat armor that I felt like I was just invincible if I was using it. And I could just keep recovering health even if I took hits. So I remember there being a lot of fights where I kind of slopped my way through. And it was like, if I take some hits, whatever, I'm going to get that health back. It's fine.
It gave you more resolve back.
Yes, that was it. So I could just like mash, using my resolve to heal and get the resolve back very quickly. And I just kind of felt invincible.
Is that like Gosaku? Or
I think that's the Gosaku armor, yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I forget. It's been long enough that I forget all the details of what they were called. But I think that also ties into a little bit of like, I think this game, like it's a very pretty game, it's a very cinematic game, and they have these themes that they try and run through that of like, oh, it's all about samurai honor and all this stuff. But then the actual playing of the game is like super gamey in a way that you can kind of like I'm not going to say quite like easily breakable, but it's like it's very gamey in a way that you can just play it like a video game and be like, oh, I can regain health and I can, spam these kunai and like, do these very gamey actions, and you just kind of get through the game anyway without real consideration of the setting and the narrative and all that stuff. So it's I mean, that's kind of a common open world disconnect to me in a lot of open world games, but like this game definitely definitely had that a lot.
Well, and we've touched on it a couple of times, but I do think it's a really important point. The game, like the very first time that you do an assassination kill, I don't know whether it's a regular one or whether it was an aerial. For me, it was an aerial. You get this flashback scene to when you're a kid, and your uncle is like, "Hey, man, you really need to be an honorable samurai. That's the only thing that's separating us from the beasts and the bandits." And it's like, well, did I just do something wrong here? I mean, I just saw a button that said assassinate. I didn't know I was going to get a flashback, And so, like, I do think that the game narratively sets up this, like, super interesting, like, you're giving me these tools gameplay-wise, right? I mean, like, should I not be using them? Like, and you don't know for the first little bit unless you go spoil yourself and, like, look on the internet. Never go to the internet. And but yeah, so you have that sort of narrative, but then once you realize that that's not like the gameplay is not really affecting it, in that way, then it does feel very video gamey. It's like, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to artificially limit myself from using these bombs that I attach to people's faces and they blow up. Now I've got all this stuff at my disposal, and then there is more of a narrative to gameplay disconnect there than I think that there could have been. And I think that they could have done some more interesting things around that, like a reputation system, like plenty of other games have done for, Paragon, Renegade, whatever. But once you realize that your gameplay doesn't really have an impact on the overall narrative and the overall story, I threw knives at so many people,
And it is a hard problem to solve. Like, it's like, for some reason, as you were talking, the Batman Arkham games came to mind, and like I think those games do a pretty good job of like you die so quickly, and your enemies have guns, so like in that way it kind of forces you to do the Batman predatory thing of staying out of the way and picking off guys. So like that's kind of an example of what a game I can think of that like kind of enforces I don't know what you want to call it, the narrative, the setting, the characters, like that kind of stuff into the gameplay. But like a lot of games I do think struggle with that. Like it's kind of a difficult thing to pull off, and probably especially in an open world game. And I don't knock Tsushima a lot for that, because I think a lot of games do, like that's just a lot of video games. But it kind of comes back to something I said earlier of like, this is just kind of, another open world game. Like it does a lot. It walks that same line that a lot of those games do.
Right.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a disconnect. Another example is the way that you have these duels with the bosses or the Straw Hat Ronin, and you cannot use those ghost weapons.
I wanted to throw sticky
during
bombs
those
at them
duels
so bad.
So it's a little bit of a disconnect. Like, I think the narrative completely abandons this notion that they're trying to lead you down this path that okay, you're starting to do whatever it takes in order to take these Mongols down.
Right.
Except for duels. For duels, you still got to do the honorable thing.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, you did how many terrible things to get into this castle, and then your best friend just betrayed you, and you're gonna fight him honorably? Dude, I'm full of knives and bombs right now. You telling me I can't use those? And the answer is no, you can't. So go forth and be honorable, but only in these little pockets where we make you be honorable. Like, those are the times I want to use all my shit, like.
Yeah. The duel, that definitely stuck out to me in the duels for sure. Even past the narrative stuff, there's a whole bunch of like goofy little gameplay quirks. That's like, you have these armor sets that have different bonuses, and you can switch them on the fly. So like, I was just constantly like, like there's an armor that makes you really good at stealth, so I would have that on and I'd be stealthing, and the second I break stealth, I open up the menu, I go switch to the armor that's really good in combat, and then your character just magically changes. If you were imagine looking at that real time, you just pop on different armor in the middle of this
You're
fight.
doing more
and-
costume changes than Lady Gaga.
Hey man,
Yeah,
you
or
don't
like
get to become the legendary ghost if you can't just magically switch armor sets on the fly.
Well,
Have you heard about this guy's legend?
blows into this giant samurai helmet out of nowhere. But I actually really didn't like that from a gameplay
I didn't either.
perspective because so I'm gonna optimize, right? I'm gonna run around in my traveler's attire the whole time. I'm just going from point A to point B. But then I run across 3 dudes on the road. Now I could kill those 3 dudes in my traveler's robe, but just in case there's a 4th dude I don't see, I'm going to take the time to go into the menu, swap into my battle armor, kill the guys, swap out of it. And it's a whole lot of going back and forth in the menus that after a while, I'm like, all right, Traveler's armor all the time. And then if I die, I'll reload and then change my armor set. And I didn't like that sort of added to-do list that I kind of had to do just to feel like I was playing the game correctly. I wish they would have put a lockout, once you start combat, whatever armor that you're in, that's just what you're in. And that would have made it actually make me feel a little better about not going in and, basically min-maxing,
Yeah. I mean, I was in the menu switching all the time, and it's like I felt like I needed, for min-maxing purposes, I felt like I wanted to, but I also hated doing it because it just disrupted the flow of everything. And again, it's another one of those things. I don't know what the right answer is. I don't know if it's preventing you from swapping once combat started, or if they just don't have different armor sets with abilities overall, or if they just have armor sets that you can swap between via a button, just like a quick swap, so you don't have to go in the menu. That doesn't help the immersion at all, but it at least cuts out the tedium of going to the menu. It's just another one of those weird things.
I'm kind of glad you guys brought that up because I did want to talk about the armors a little bit. And I also agree that juggling them was a pain. I did write down a few pre-show notes, and that's literally one of the notes I wrote down. But to be fair, I also felt that way a bit in Breath of the Wild. So
there's plenty of open world games that do similar stuff.
Yeah, that kind of inventory management it's like you said, I don't know what the solution is because, you have, especially if you unlock most of them, the game gives you all these distinctly themed armor sets that kind of a lot of times they enhance 1 or 2 facets of the gameplay in interesting ways, right?
We
really haven't talked about the archery, but I remember there was a decent chunk of the game where I just enjoyed especially popping out of the grass. That was kind of satisfying where you pop out and pull your bow and shoot some guy in the head. But you have this armor set that gives you more of the time slowdown, and if you shoot somebody in the head, you get more of that back.
Right.
Early on in the game, I like to use the Ronin attire. I use the Traveler's attire, like you said, quite a bit. But when I felt like I was going into a challenging section, I switched over to the Ronin attire. Like you said, if I felt like something was easy, I would just stay in the Traveler's attire and just do it. But if I felt like I was going into a camp or whatever, I would switch into the armor that I wanted to use for that section. And for a lot of the early game, it was Ronin because it gave you some stealth bonuses and some melee damage bonuses. And then later in the game, I kind of liked the Sakai clan armor, which gave you longer chains in the standoffs where you could kill 5 people in a row in the standoffs. But I used a lot of the ghost armor too because it was just good.
So I'm glad that you brought up the Sakai armor. When they gave you that armor,
Hang on, Paul. Your voice cut out a little bit.
okay.
I can hear you now, so try repeating what you said.
All right. So the Sakai clan armor, right? When they gave you that, I was so incredibly excited for the standoff streak and also the chance to terrify enemies. I'm like, oh man, that's exactly what I want to do. I want to run in here and kill 4 dudes and then the other 2 run away because they're terrified of me. But they gave me that armor right as soon as they threw me into Act 3 and killed all my timing windows on standoff. So I was so happy to get it, but then I felt so incredibly sad when I didn't feel like the game wanted me to use it anymore on enemies in Act 3. Now, if I went back to Act 1 or Act 2, it's different. But the way that I played through the game, I felt like they gave me that armor that looks like it has some really cool benefits. And no, you can't really use them because we're gonna make those standoffs a lot harder from here on out. And I was so perturbed by that.
That's funny. I didn't even think about that, but I could see that because I didn't use it a whole lot. But I do remember like what you said. Like I don't remember if it was Act 2 or Act 3, but they added like the fake outs, and
Yeah,
those got me all the time.
Yeah.
Like I did still pull off some good standoffs, and usually if I got the first one or two, I would be in good shape. But like you said, like it felt so bad when you like walk up to these Mongols and you like shout and challenge them to a duel, and you're like doing like straight, this is like straight Kurosawa stuff, right? Like
yeah,
you
yeah.
might as well have like the grainy film, like you guys just walking up with the sword out and like doing like yajutsu slashes, and like they fake you out and then just like whack you.
The
Almost
fake outs
kill you.
crack me up.
Yeah, it
Like
becomes a comedy.
Yeah.
I just imagine like actual, soldiers from that time period like just doing this. Oh, you gonna move now, huh? What?
And so my recollection, this is a bit old now, so I could be wrong about this. I'm sure fans will correct me, but Act 2, I believe, introduced the fake outs, but then Act 3 shortened all the timing windows on both the fake outs and just the regular standoff. So it was like a double thing, and I actually thought I got way worse at the game. Like I'm like, dude, I haven't drank in like forever. Am I drunk right now? Like trying to get this reaction timing down. And that's when the internet was kind enough to tell me, like, no, man, in Act 3, those windows are like half of what they used to be. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm glad that someone told me that. And now I'm just going to put on this ghost armor and be sad for the entire act.
Yeah, those fake outs. That was what I was talking about. Like the 1/3 of the game, until that point, I totally was doing all of those standoffs because it was just fun, just like running my sword through dudes and just like gloating over them. Then when they started doing the fake outs and then they threw me off, I just said, all right, well, I guess I'm gonna do more of the stealthy stuff then. It didn't bum me out as much when you got the Sakai armor and all the way at the end because I pretty much used that ghost armor that you get like really at the end. But I do agree that getting this mythical Sakai armor should have come at a moment where it just feels like you're this super powerful dude and you're just gonna wreck everybody. But it kind of feels like it just got inserted at the wrong time.
Yeah, and I think it's a weird thing because I actually think for me the way the stealth felt and the combat, like the way all that felt, like I think it's a perfectly good like action game, like in just how it feels and just like the combat itself. So like I feel like we're nitpicking a lot, but I do want to stress that like I do think it's a perfectly well playing game. But it is all of those little details around the edges that I think just make it not feel like as like it feels like there was opportunity for it to be more special or positive or something, and they kind of like all around the edges they kind of like tempered it back to just a very gamey game that was not as interesting as it potentially could have been.
Yeah, and I also think maybe narratively a little bit, if they would have done something a little bit more with some of the side quests, like maybe when you're questing with Yuna, or just some of the narrative bits that really made the stealth thing more attractive from a narrative standpoint, then maybe I would have bought into it a little earlier as the player. But you're hounding me a lot with the samurai stuff, and I mean that's just my natural predilection anyway. But if they would have introduced a little bit more of the, well, this is why you're doing this, and not make Jin such a tortured soul every time he killed someone from a stealth position, then maybe that would have altered my perceptions as a player. But again, the game plays very well. It's a very tight game, whether you're doing the stealth sections or whether you're running into the middle of a camp. It's just, I thought that the the gameplay forcing you in the direction towards the ghost away from the samurai. That just felt a little ham-fisted, and the exclamation point for me was getting that Sakai clan armor, which looks so cool, and I upgraded it immediately. And then it's like, well, actually, and that, and that's probably also partly because of the way that I played the game, which was a whole lot of side stuff in Act 1, not as much side stuff in Act 2, and no side stuff in Act 3. So that's probably partly on me as the player for, grabbing that armor and then mainlining when I probably had some more opportunity to use it and I just didn't take it.
Did everyone kind of follow that pattern? Like do less side stuff as we went? I know I did.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, I didn't maybe go quite as hard, but I did cut way back in Acts 2 and 3. But I still did I think I did some of the armor side quests and the unlockable side quests, and I did a couple of the bigger bandit camps in Act 3 as well. Or Mongol. Excuse me.
Mongol, yeah.
Excuse me. Mongol encampments. I did want to like you guys were mentioning, I did actually want to share a little bit of a story that was more positive, because I do agree that this game is really well rounded. It's well made, and it has a cool veneer, and I actually like the storytelling, which we haven't gotten into, and the gameplay itself is fun. I think it's easy in these kind of casts to pick at these details, which I do think are important. I think there's a reason why this game it's not a bad game. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah.
But
I think the stuff it does well is stuff that all of these games have done well. So it's kind of a known quantity.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of wonder if the open world structure benefited what they were trying to do with the rest of the game. Because I think a lot of us have talked about things we enjoyed, like the standoffs or the archery, or some parts of the stealth mechanics that were fun. I think the melee was done pretty well. Maybe not quite as good as a game like Sekiro, but at the same time, I thought the stance combat was fun. I thought the parries and perfect dodges and perfect parries were fun. But there is, I think, one thing is that the open world structure doesn't always deliver that optimal gameplay. It did for me once or twice, and there was one fun story that I had from it where I think it was in Act 2, where the Mongol encampments were getting bigger, so you couldn't just kill 3 dudes and be done with it. But they weren't so some of the Act 3 ones were huge. They were just gigantic.
They really took forever, some of the later ones, and
yeah,
I feel like you could spend a half an hour just clearing a single camp or fort or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, it was crazy. Just you'd have to spend time traversing and circling back, and it's did I miss some guys or whatever?
Where's this bomb in the middle of the camp that's conveniently located for all these? I can't find it for this one.
Yeah, it's it's by this mine shaft. But yeah, there was this camp in Act 2, and I think it was in this Japanese style fort, which was it's very square. So you have this square fort, and it's got these square buildings inside of it. And I don't remember if I climbed over a wall or exactly how I got inside, but I kind of remember I was perched up on this wall, and these 2 dudes walked by, and I dropped down and assassinated both of them. And then I walked over into the grass, and I saw a couple of guys kind of down a hallway. And so I popped out with my bow and quickly shot both of them. And then I climbed back up on a rooftop and, came to the middle, and there were a couple of other guys who saw the guys I killed with the archery, and they came over, and, I was able to kind of drop down on them. And then there were, I'd killed enough guys where I felt comfortable going into melee fighting.
Right.
And so that was one of the few open world moments where it was okay, I see what they're trying to do, with this whole bandit camp thing, where you kind of have the ability to exercise the stealth gameplay and the archery, and you could also, maybe if you wanted to, you could use some misdirection. I chose to go more melee at that point, but
You could toss some chimes.
Yeah, well, I mean, and it's funny because like Ryan's story does remind me of one of those times where I'm like, I'm gonna toss these chimes. These chimes emit poison. And then when this guy runs over, I'm gonna shoot him with this other poison that makes him very angry. And then just watching that one angry guy run through the camp and cause havoc, like that's another open world type experience that I thought it was hilarious. I mean, and then once that was over, I'm like, wow, like that section really delivered on this one piece here that I thought was it was fun, it was funny, but also it was very effective from a gameplay sort of strategy. Like I had to go stealth to a certain point in the camp, throw those chimes in at a certain spot, then have one guy come over and choke on them, and then the other big guy with his big axe run over and like, what do? And I'm like, ha, and that worked really well. And I have a couple of those, but those are, those were fewer and further between than what I would have liked, but they were still really, really good whenever they happened.
Yeah, that you saying it's fewer and further in between kind of hits on the thought I was having as you are talking. It's like I definitely agree that like I feel like there were good emergent encounters along the way, but then there were also so many encampments. There were so many road encounters that like all of that was diluted by there just being so much of it, and a lot of it just ends up getting repetitive. And I mean, I'm guessing that's why a lot of us fell off doing side stuff, is just like you just get tired of it at a certain point. So like I think that's again like where the kind of gaminess kind of comes back in and kind of maybe makes those moments not as special as they could have been, when it's like, all right, now you're going to do it 20 more times.
Well, I mean, it was fun every single time that you rode your horse right at this patrol and then jumped off your horse and drop kicked the crap out of a guy.
That is pretty
fun
good.
every time. I never got tired of that.
For me, it was introducing bears into any scenario. That was always a fun tactic. You would find a cage with a bear.
Yeah,
Bears
that's
always
tough.
Unlock the
came out
cage
for me.
and be like, have at it.
Yeah.
I would be like, yeah, like I'm gonna try to run away from this bear as fast as possible, and then I would like go flying through the air in the other direction where it was attacking me.
That's one of those open world tricks that never, I mean, like Far Cry games and probably others have been doing similar stuff for a while, but like that is one of those open world tricks that for some reason for me has never gotten old, is unleashing animals on your enemies.
And there was some weird physics in this game with that. I know everyone's seen it. You're just riding along, and then all of a sudden there's a Mongol body flying through the air, and then you look, and there's some poor archer whose buddy just got pawed at by a bear, and his buddy flew like 300 feet. I mean, it's like it's not even close to realistic. It's definitely like I feel like the physics engine is broken. Like that number should have been like 0, but it got knocked backwards to 255, and that's how far this guy's. And it was funny every time, even though I'm like, this is the way this should work. But that Mongol's flying through the air and he's screaming real good.
Apparently, Tsushima is home to some very dangerous bears.
Yeah,
they really captured the historic realism. The real thing that saved Tsushima from Mongol invasion wasn't the kamikaze or wasn't the Ghost of Tsushima. It was the bears.
Japan has a real bear problem, and
Yeah.
actually, that's I found out that that's actually not a joke. Like there have been like bear attacks in the hundreds this year alone, like since May. So maybe they're capturing some realism there.
Yeah.
Well,
Note
that's
to invaders:
terrifying.
don't invade Japan. They
Yeah.
have bears.
And I feel like that I remember shouting at the bears one time. Steph could probably confirm or deny this. Samurai training never taught me how to fight a bear. Like I'm just sitting there picking some flowers, doing my thing. A bear comes out of nowhere, and I'm like, how do I parry you? And it's like, you don't, you die. And so then I realized explosive arrows at a distance were the best thing. But those bears could be sneaky, man. They'd come up on me, and then all of a sudden I was just dead. So
Is it honorable to throw a sticky bomb at a bear?
I mean, I did it.
This is why you become the ghost.
This is
So,
why you become
so
the ghost.
speaking of wildlife, if I can pivot here, there's a certain little yellow bird in this game.
Oh man,
Oh god, I
If
hate
we
it.
if we want to make this pivot,
No, go
it's
ahead.
totally fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
that bird drove me absolutely insane. That's like, I mean, we're gonna get into the collectibles here in a minute, and this is the game's version of, hey, here's how we point out you're near a collectible. Is this little yellow bird flies by and kind of circles around until you follow it, and it's like it's really hard to ignore that. It's hard to ignore that bird for two reasons. One, it's literally just always there, so it's just by sight and sound hard to ignore it. But also, if you have any amount of that gamer brain that wants to collect anything, like it's hard to like psychologically ignore it as well. And like that thing, like I kind of appreciated it at first of like, oh, it's letting me know something's nearby. But then once you realize just how many endless collectibles there are in this game, and that bird is always floating around and chirping near you, that thing drove me nuts.
It's heavy-handed.
Very.
I kind of agree with you in that I appreciated what they were trying to do and saying like, oh, you're riding right past a hot springs, like, hey, you don't want to miss this, right? But yeah, the bird showed up all the time. There were a couple times it was kind of bugged, I think. And there were times
yes.
where
It
there were
bugged for
times
me all the time.
where I literally had a waypoint to the thing it started leading me to, and it's like, are you kidding me? Like, I literally have my map markers set to like go to this hot spring or to this quest giver or whatever, and like as soon as I get within like 100 miles of it, like this bird pops up and is like, I'm like, should I follow you? Like, which way are you leading me?
I got irrationally angry at those birds like once or twice. And it's like it's just like you said, Ryan. I have a hot spring, and I've marked it on my map, so I know where I'm going. I'm going to that hot spring. And then this bird's like, come this way instead. And I'm like, I'll talk to you later. I'm going to this hot spring. And the bird's just like, hey, there's something over here. And I'm like, I don't care about Mr. Fox. I'm going to the hot spring. So that I wish that they could have just turned those off when I already know where I'm going,
Yeah,
And
for
it
me, it
distract
was
you-
like,
Go ahead.
sorry. For me, it was like by the fourth haiku location, I was just like, I'm done with this. I don't want any more headbands. No more birds. I'm just going where I want to go now.
Yeah, and it would get stuck. Like probably the most frustrated I got in this entire game was I was following a bird, and I was like near a town, and it got stuck on this building. It like flew into this building, and it's just flapping into the building, not moving. And I'm just sitting here staring at this bird. I'm like, all right, I give up. I'm not going to follow you. And I start wandering away, and then it comes back to me and starts circling around again. I'm like, what do you want? And then I start following it again. And it runs right back into the building. I'm like, oh, come on.
And like there were several times when that happened where I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go find everything around this town to make this bird despawn. And I would go to like this haiku, those hot springs, these like I would go to like every check mark on the map in like this radius around wherever that would happen. And I go back and that bird's still there. And I'm like, dude, I found all the stuff. And whatever I didn't find, I ain't finding. Turned out it was a freaking bamboo challenge around the corner, and that's what the bird kept getting stuck on, and that was so annoying.
Yeah, it's wild. Like I mean, all open world games have a lot of collectibles in general, but like something about this game, like they wanted you to find all of the collectibles. So like, and that was their solution, and it just felt like trying to like really get you to follow that. I don't know if we can call it compulsive behavior or what, but like it just really wanted you to engage with that all the time, and it became exhausting.
Yeah, and they gave you skills to find all the stuff. Like they gave you skills to unlock the skills, and that's fine. But it's like I got birds, I got guiding wind, which we should talk about that for just a second, and then also like you've given me ways to literally find everything there is to find within the game system without me going to any external resource. I don't need all of that, and you gave me all of that, and I'm just like, Okay, that's a little like, okay, Mr. Bird, I get it. And I know where you're going, but I'm not going that way because I know where I'm going because I've got a skill that tells me where I'm going, you know? Um,
Yeah. I
but
kind of wish that the birds would be like a different color or something, and each of depending on the color, it would tell that would let you know what you would find, and then you could say, you're gonna take me to another poetry haiku spot. I'm just gonna ignore you. Oh, but this one is taking me to a hot spring, and that could actually be useful. But all the birds were the same, and you didn't know whether you were gonna end up at some sort of bandit camp or a bamboo strike. It was all kind of the same.
yeah, yeah.
And I think and I feel like I've been saying this a lot, but this is not a new, like a lot of open world games have this philosophy, but like I think having the bird in particular, like almost emphasized it more of like the world really was a giant playground / checklist, like and this is maybe just a philosophical open world thing, but like it made the open world not really feel that engaging to me. It felt like I was just following the wind, I was following a bird, I was following some other waypoint, and like it made it felt wasteful of the open world. Like they created this beautiful open world, but I never spent time exploring the world naturally. I was spending all my time following a bird or the wind, or I was following these things, but I wasn't doing my own exploration, if that makes sense. And like
Yeah, I was hoping that it would be a little bit more like Breath of the Wild, where a lot of these discoveries would be just accidental instead of some sort of mechanic that you just follow like a waypoint system. Instead, it's like, oh, that point looks interesting. Let me try to, climb that mountain and see what's on top. Certain times I'd be like, okay, this is a cool looking mountain. Let's see what's on top. Nothing's on top.
yeah,
There
if
was
there wasn't a
nothing
bird
that
leading you
was
up there, it's probably nothing.
exactly, which was a little bit disappointing. I wish there was more of the kind of you just stumble upon things rather than having this mechanic um, holding your hand and then taking you to the spot. I think it would have been cooler to have something more like Breath of the Wild, where it's like, this area looks kind of suspicious. There should be something here, and you find something there. It kind of gives you a sense of accomplishment.
So
Yeah, so the world just didn't feel alive to me in that way because of all the mechanics kind of like very obviously guiding you through everything. And like that's kind of a common complaint I have with a lot of open world games, but Tsushima definitely did it too.
yeah, and I think a lot of it kind of depends on what you're looking for and like what kind of gamer that you are. Because for me, as much as I found the bird itself annoying, I almost felt this like odd comfort of like, you know what, I can check all these boxes and I'm not gonna miss anything as long as I want to spend the time. And like for me, if you compare it to something like Breath of the Wild, it's almost like it scratched two different itches for me. Breath of the Wild, I could run around and then I have that thrill of discovery, whereas with Ghost of Tsushima, it scratched a different itch of like checking off a to-do list. It's like I got this hot spring. There's one less hot spring to find in this world, and if I wanted to, right now, I could go find every single hot spring with these skills that take me to where the hot springs are. So I don't think I came to Tsushima looking for that spirit of discovery. I think I came to it more looking for feeling like a badass and then checking boxes while I'm at it, and that's really what the game was set up for. I don't think it had a whole lot of, what would you call it, emergent discovery or just organic discovery. Like they didn't
Yeah,
really have much of any
Emergent
of that.
gameplay
yeah,
or things
and
like
that's
that.
what I think Alex and I were talking about. And I think to a point Ryan made earlier is like I think if they were going for more the checklist, like kind of completionist, like that level of satisfaction, I think the game would have been just as well served from like a more linear or wide linear, whatever you want to call it. Like they could make it
Agreed.
more check. Like it just the open world just felt
Agreed.
wasted to me. Like it just felt like they put in a lot of neat scenery that kind of had no purpose.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us, or maybe all of us on this panel, feel like that maybe the collectibles were pretty heavy-handed, and I enjoyed most of them, like the first 3 to 5 times. like the Inari shrines, like some of the shrine climbs. It's like, oh, you climb and you get this cool scene, but like by the time you're hitting number 6 or number 8 or whatever, it's like, you just roll your eyes as soon as you see it, especially if you're following the bird or whatever. Like, I enjoyed the. Oh, what was that?
Oh, I just really quick thing. I have a personal beef that's probably just me, and everyone else can dismiss this, but I have a personal beef with those shrines. Is you climb up that mountain, you do this platforming challenge, you get to the top, and then the game literally gives you no way to get down except for turn around, and it like gives you a prompt that says, do you want to go back down? And you say yes, and it just teleports you back to the bottom. And this is a freaking open world game that they have to teleport you back down something. I'm like, what in the world are you doing? Give me a cool way to get down this damn mountain. You have screwed up. And that's probably a very me complaint, but that was so immersion breaking and just so stupid, and I hated it. I wanted a cooler way down that mountain.
Yeah, you mentioned this before about how it would be nice if you had that glider like you had in Breath of the Wild. You could just like jump right off and float. Like maybe in the sequel they should like let you create your own zip line, and then you just like like just zip right down or something. And then you could just like jump off anywhere at some point, or I feel like it would have really continued that sense of discovery rather than this kind of more stilted, disjointed, all right, you're done with this little section, screen fades to black, okay, now reload, you're now back at the bottom, now set a new waypoint. It doesn't feel as connected.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I'm not saying that like Skyrim did this perfectly, because it got kind of humorous by the end, but every dungeon you had a quick way out. Right? I mean, there was like a barred door you would unbar, or there was like some sort of like, side cave that would take you back to the entrance. And granted, the first couple of times you saw that, you went, wow, the pinnacle of dungeon design. And then by time number 74, you're like, oh, cool, another barred door. But at least they tried something that wasn't just like run all the way back through the dungeon that you just came through, like something like Oblivion or Morrowind did. Whereas this game didn't try anything either. It didn't give you some cool way to like, get back down off the mountain, or give you some cool way to like, you pushed a button and then all of a sudden you've got some grapple points to swing all the way back. It really is immersion breaking just to be like, hey man, this was hard. Would you like to teleport? And it's like, no, I want you to give me a badass way to get off this mountain. And even though maybe Skyrim didn't do it well, someone had this idea in 2011. You could have at least tried something in 2020 to make this a little less immersion breaking. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's again, it's like it's a kind of minor thing, but I feel like this game has a lot of those minor things that like just make the open world feel not as immersive as it could be. Real quick before we move on from the kind of the collectibles stuff, I want to read a list of the collectibles because it's just hilarious to me, just how much stuff is in here. If you'll indulge me. So there are 10 hidden altars, 59 pieces of vanity gear you can find, 18 hot springs, 16 bamboo strikes, 16 Shinto shrines, 8 lighthouses, 23 pillars of honor, 49 fox dens. It's a lot of foxes. 19 haiku, 25 duels, 80 sashimono banners. I'll pretend I pronounced it right. 40 records, 50 Mongol artifacts, and 20 singing crickets.
And a partridge in a pear tree.
Yes.
I mean, that is a ton of collectibles. And as much as I appreciated the game guiding me to them, I mean, I got a little stressed out just listening to you read that entire list because it feels overwhelming,
It's a lot of stuff. And a lot of them are not, like, the hot springs increase your health. The bamboo strikes increase your resolve. I think it's called.
Yeah, resolve.
And the fox dens, up to a point, increase your charm slots. So, like,
Yeah.
those kind of ones have very direct gameplay enhancements, but it's a very small percentage of the collectibles that are that. Most of them are headbands or vanity gear, or like the Mongol artifacts are the equivalents of codex entries. Like there's
Right.
a lot of collectibles that are just kind of in that tier, and the bird will happily take you to those just as quickly as they will take you to the hot springs.
Yeah.
I am glad that they unlocked all your charm slots at like 10 Fox Shrines and didn't make you do
Yeah,
all of them.
I agree. I don't even remember what you get if you do more Fox Shrines than that, but
You get some very powerful minor charms. If you're playing through that game on, I don't remember the difficulty levels, but it's one of the higher difficulty levels, then those Fox Shrines, as you continue to find more of them, they level up the minor charms in a way that make them extraordinarily powerful. So that almost becomes a gameplay must to upgrade those minor charms. So like I did that a little bit, but I wasn't playing the game on anything higher than normal, so it wasn't really required for this kind of the kind of enemies that I was facing. But apparently it's fairly important at higher difficulty levels to have some of that stuff. And I'm not interested in finding 49 Fox Shrines, so I'll just finish the game on normal and move on to the next thing on my to play list.
Yeah, I was getting duplicate charms, and so it just became redundant and useless to keep doing those Fox Shrines, other than just to check off the trophy. I would have preferred something that was more significant, because once you max out those slots and the resolve and all that stuff, there's other than just like for cosmetic reasons, there's not a whole lot to drive you to keep doing that, unless you're just chasing after those trophies.
Right.
and that list of collectibles didn't include like the Mongol camps. It didn't include other side quests. It didn't include the mythic quests. Like it didn't include any like quest type stuff. Like that's just pure collectibles, because there's a whole lot of that other stuff too.
Right. And I mean, like, I'm pretty sure if there was a way to open up the map and just see all the dots on the map from like a fresh game of just how much stuff there is to do in this world, it would be absolutely insane. I don't know how many hours it would take you to go from start to finish, but I mean, I probably put 40 something hours into this game, maybe a little north of that. I felt like I maybe did half if I was just guessing, but there's
The other half I would guess would go a lot quicker. If I had to make a guess, like a full completionist run of this game is probably in the 60 to 70 hour ballpark. But I mean, so it's not maybe the longest game, but it's, I mean, to your point, there is a whole lot in this game you can do. Like it can last quite a few dozen hours.
yeah, yeah. The internet backs you up on that one. So yeah, I don't know, it just felt overwhelming to me. Like I feel like I put in 40 hours and it was like, yeah, man, look at all these dots, and I'm like, yeah, that's another 40 hours. I'm not doing that. But like you said, it apparently is not as long as I thought it was. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I think once you get like good gear and you kind of, unlock things, I think you can probably just roll through parts of the map pretty quickly. I am curious from all of you how many, speaking of side quests and that kind of stuff, like how much outside of the main story quests did you all do? Like I did the mythic quest and I did the archer Ishikawa, was that his name?
Yeah,
Um,
Ishikawa Sensei.
So I did his full quest line and I did all the mythic quests, and I basically did nothing else in terms of side quests. Like I didn't do any of the other characters' quest lines unless required by the main story, and I didn't do any of the just other random side quests outside of the character quest lines.
So I did almost all the character side quests. Like I finished out everybody except for Noshiro, the warrior monk. I didn't finish him out. But I finished out everybody else. I think where I was lacking in terms of gameplay wasn't the side quests, it was a lot of the collectibles. Like I didn't go to hardly any of the Mongol camps in Act 2 or 3. I might have cleared 3 places in Act 2 and nothing in Act 3 unless the story required it. But I did do all of those character side quests.
Yeah, me too. I actually was pulled in by the narrative of those side characters. I did all the mythic quests, got all the special armor just to check it out. But I was pretty invested in, what was going to happen with Ishikawa's student. What was going on. I mean, I wasn't as interested in Lady Adachi's side story, but a lot of them at the end to me was worth it because there was always some dark turn for what the outcome of it. So I and definitely Kenji. Kenji was a great
Kenji was
character.
pretty funny.
Kenji.
He's
He
that
was great.
classic like rascal, the sake merchant.
I promise I was stealing, for the villagers.
Yeah,
You
there's-
weren't.
I think it was at the end of either his second or final quest line where Jin is saying, you need to take up a more honorable trade, and Kenji just kind of like kicks back and he's like, honor is my specialty.
Yes. Most honorable guy here.
Like, perfect. You got this. I did the first few of Ishikawa and Lady Adachi, but I didn't finish those. I only did the first one or two of Norio. I liked his character, but by that point, was it Norio?
Yeah.
He's
yeah,
the monk bro, is that right?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I said Noshiro. I think I'm just making shit up. Norio sounds right. Yeah.
I think it was Norio, but I'm not
Yeah.
100%. I did like the first one or two. I liked his character, and if I had continued, I might have. But at that point, I was a touch burned out on the side quests. I did do all of Kenji and Yuna's side quests. There were only like three of Kenji and 4 of Yuna.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Those didn't take long, and then I did all of the armors, and I didn't do the flaming oil mythic side quests, but I did every other one besides that. So I did, I guess, most of the content related quests and maybe half or a little more of the character quests. Yeah.
At that flaming oil, the flaming sword quest was a little bit annoying because you're constantly climbing this mountain and you have a time limit to get between the fire the fire camps. So if you don't make it in time, you freeze to death, and so it's just constantly a race against the clock, trying to figure out where you need to go on this like mountain that's just like covered. Your screen is just covered in snow.
Yeah, I couldn't see anything. That's actually, I started that quest, went up there, got lost, died, and then I was like, do I need more gear for this? Like, I don't understand if it's like a Breath of the Wild type, get your food and armor. I figured it probably wasn't, but I was like, I also don't want to spend like an hour figuring out how to, which way to go when I can't see anything. So I just kind of like pieced out of that one.
Yeah. I don't think I did that one at all. I must have completely missed it because that's not ringing any bells for me.
Yeah, it was one of the last ones in the game, so if you really just blitz through Act 3, you would have missed it.
Yeah, I guess I missed that one. Okay.
One thing, we're talking about side quests. At some point, I would like to segue into the bigger story.
I think we're probably good to do that now, unless anyone else has any big... I think the one last gameplay thing I'll just quickly mention is, and this is another common open world thing that frustrates me and makes it feel like the open world is not used as well as it could be, is the like, you are leaving the mission zone instant fail screens.
I hate that so much.
And it's a super common thing, and almost every open world game does it, and this game did it too. And when I saw that pop up, it was just another one of those kind of exasperated, like, yep, here we go. It's another one of these, but
Yep.
It kind of just is what it is. But it's another one of those things that kind of drilled home, like, this is very much the open world design of like 10 years ago. And I kind of wish it had evolved more in some of those ways.
Yep. I got you.
But yeah,
I agree.
Otherwise, I'm good to move on to the more central story.
Yeah. So this central story, I mean, it was very much sort of inspired by those old samurai movies, right? And we talked about the Mongol invasion. They're there on your island, and and then your first goal is to kind of go and rescue your uncle, right? Your uncle's been captured by Khotan Khan, and you try that once, and then you get yeeted into a river, which is a real problem. And then you sort of get some allies come back, and you do it again. And I don't know, like what did you guys think of some of the dialogue between Khotan Khan and Shimura? Just sort of like when you were like looking in on them, not when Jin was present, but just here's a cutscene where Khan and Shimura are talking. Like I thought that was kind of refreshing to see that perspective, not through the main character's eyes, just to see those characters interact with each other a little bit. Did you guys like that, or did it just sort of pass over? What did you guys think?
I liked it. Yeah, it was kind of this contrast of the uncle Lord Shimura was saying, Jin would never do those things. He's honorable, and then you're just like going around and like stabbing people in the back, and it's just like kind of this interesting contrast of like his expectations and what you have to do. You have to do whatever it takes to get to save your uncle. Including allying with the people that rebelled against your own people. You basically are doing all the things that your uncle would look down upon. So it's nice to see this kind of conversation where Khotan kind of sprinkles in like, I don't think your nephew the way that you think you do.
Yeah, and I think that also showed Khotan Khan's like his sleazy manipulative side as well, which I think is an important part of his character. Is like he was really trying to get under Lord Shimura's skin in those conversations, in the way Alex was saying of like, really painting Jin as like an unhonorable, not samurai, so to speak. Because I think he did, Khotan Khan did a handful of, he would resort to any tactic. So, he was very clearly not bound by any code or whatever. And that included all sorts of like psychological manipulation as well. Like which he would use against Shimura there. He also converted Jin's friend, whose name I forget, by
Ryuzo.
Yeah, by, kind of using manipulation tactics and stuff. So like I think those scenes showed a lot of that side of his character.
Yeah, I also liked Khotan. I guess it's Han was actually, I don't know, but I kind of liked. They did sometimes paint him with a little bit of a twirly mustache, but a lot of times they sort of more painted him as like ruthlessly pragmatic. And from the very first scene, like Paul, you mentioned it, where I think it was Lord Adachi rides out to meet him head to head, and he just literally like throws wine on him and sets him on fire, which of course, obviously it's dramatic. Like I assume that a trained warrior would probably not just let that happen so quickly, but it kind of is trying to demonstrate that like, he's willing to fight in unconventional ways. And even in the final battle, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but there's this, I guess I will go ahead and do this, but in your final battle with Khotan Khan, like it goes through these sequences and Jin breaks his spear in half. And so he throws away part of it, pulls out a shield and just keeps fighting with like half a spear. So, they kind of paint the Han as like a very like what's the word, resourceful villain at times. Sometimes they do put the twirly mustache on him because he's the evil invader or whatever, but I sort of like that aspect of his character of being like ruthlessly pragmatic and just sort of doing whatever it takes.
Yeah, and they use that a lot to kind of fuel Jin's transformation towards being ruthlessly pragmatic himself, because they repeatedly show, like one of you mentioned at the beginning, him throwing the wine and just setting someone on fire who's trying to fight honorable. And they show time and time again that anytime someone tries to fight honorable against him, he comes up with some like, he's willing to use other more devious tactics that just kind of shuts down the straightforward, honorable approach. So they kind of frame it as Jin realizes the samurai code doesn't work. It's too predictable. Koten Khan is going to, he's always going to see that coming. He's going to find a sleazy way around it and just shut it down. And that's kind of why Jin goes through the transformation he goes through. It was a little heavy-handed with it sometimes, maybe. And part of me wonders, like, how historically accurate all that is. But I think for the story they were trying to tell, it worked. It almost had, like, a Batman vibe to me of, like, the protagonist Jin having to become the monster to stop the monster, so to speak, like, which is played up, like, that kind of same vibe is played up in various Batman stories as well.
Right. Yeah, and I definitely see that, and they also did a really good job, I think, of showing Koten as both pragmatic, but also he was capable of great acts of violence. I mean, him forcing Ryuzo to set the peasants on fire to try to frighten the people out of Castle Shimura, the second castle that he goes and takes up residence in. Like, that was a pretty dark scene. And, he presents himself as this, like, well-spoken, sort of reasonable guy who just wants you to surrender, And then if you don't, that's okay. We're just going to burn several people at the stake in front of you. And it's like, that's a weird dichotomy, but is probably relatively accurate historically, at least for, some conquerors that are out there. But I think the game did a fairly good job of sort of, trying to show you that neither one of those polar opposites were right. And in my mind, the opposites were Koten Khan and Lord Shimura. Right? Shimura he lost like half of his troops after he charged across a bridge, and Koten blew it up. And then it's like, okay, well, we're going to rebuild the bridge and charge again. What are you doing, sir? Like, that's not a good point. He blew it up once. You think he's not going to blow it up again? And it's like, well, the code demands it. And that kind of rigid thinking is what got kind of them into this mess. But I feel like, at least for me, they hammed him up a little too much on I am not going to learn from my mistakes. I'm going to murder all of us for them. And it's like, I get that. I get that the samurai code's supposed to be this way, and I get what you're trying to do narratively with Jin, but I think that they made Shimura just a little too stark and just a little too dense for at least my liking.
Yeah, I do think they were heavy-handed with his character in particular, of just like really trying to drive the point home that no, the straightforward samurai code is not going to work, and they showed that maybe a couple times too many, of him just running headfirst in and it failing.
It's interesting because I'm a bit skeptical of the whole they kind of played up sort of the Bushido angle of being a samurai, and like Shimura kind of embodying that. And I mean, there probably were samurai who were that kind, just like there were probably knights who were that chivalrous in real history. But I think, in reality, the samurai were pretty pragmatic and sometimes very backstabbing individuals. So, I was kind of skeptical of that angle, especially when they first presented it. But they were consistent with that in his character. And one thing I like both in Jin's development and in Shimura's development is when you see the flashbacks, you kind of see Shimura as being like he was sort of Jin's father figure. And he was really like a good father. Like, he would teach him to fight, and, he was very level-headed, like didn't really get upset with Jin over much of anything. And like, in the actual current timeline, you see that he wants to adopt Jin as like, I guess his sort of like son, like his actual official son, I guess, maybe in terms of like a nobility thing. So it is interesting, like I actually think Jin's character arc, both obviously it's sort of a foil, and Shimura, like you said, is very much too rigid, but I think they were consistent in that development, and a lot of the moments of like showing his backstory and showing his reactions to Jin, like his character reactions. Now, like you said, his tactical reactions sometimes were just totally stupid, but his character reactions to Jin in the present, and especially at the end, I felt like that created sort of a powerful ending sequence. Whereas with Jin, he did have a sense of honor, and after losing on the beach and then losing, he kind of threw himself at Khotan Khan. I felt like that was maybe a bit heavy-handed, but after losing on the beach, he was just like, well, I'm just going to storm in by myself and kill, and it didn't work. And he lost hard at that point. But then, you're trying to free Taka, and he's having to sneak into this camp, and Yuna is like, if you raise the alarm, they'll kill the prisoners. Obviously, it's a bit contrived, but it's sort of this hostage situation. And so Jin is like, he kind of has to make a decision on the spot, and he it's sort of a cinematic sequence where he stabs that first guy, and then he falls on his back and just kind of stares at the sky. And, he's like, it's kind of I felt like that was a good start for him down this path of like taking this more, because in that sense, like I guess what they were labeling as like the honorable samurai approach would have gotten innocent bystanders killed. So he was sort of forced to take this approach that kind of like, disagreed with his personal sense of honor and with the way he had been raised. So I thought that character development, it was kind of interesting to see, from that moment into Act 2, where you're trying to raise an army, and Jin is getting more comfortable with this role of using these unconventional tactics, and it starts to put him at odds with Shimura. And like, I think the Yarikawa rebellion was another good moment of, this is an invasion, and it's like a brutal repression, and you obviously you see scenes that even if the Khan may or may not have approved of them directly, you had people starving and people being like butchered or strung up or whatever, like, even if that wasn't directly the Khan's intentions, like sometimes during invasions, that kind of brutality just happens, or on the ground soldiers, and, Jin's fighting against it, and he goes into Yarikawa, and that's when you get the ability to like slaughter the leaders. So you're fighting to break through this siege, and you have a duel with this leader, and then that's the point where you get the ghost mode. So Jin kind of takes a step further, like you win that duel, and then it's like, okay, well now you're not just going to kill this guy, you're going to brutalize him like in front of his soldiers. And I kind of thought the ghost mode was fun from a gameplay perspective too, because it fed in well with the stealth. Like you get a few kills without damage, and then suddenly you can just go like Hulk out and like one shot everybody while they're like running away from you. That was kind of fun, but it kind of shows Jin like he's using at this point he's starting to not only use guerrilla tactics to fight against these invaders, but he's starting to like use
psychological warfare.
Yeah, just like kind of like go down some dark roads. Even more so than perhaps the assassination. Like he's starting to kind of like openly brutalize these enemies in a way that they were doing. And I guess
Yuna just kind of piggybacks on that and spreads that legend of the ghost around to all the people, right? So it kind of that legend starts to grow and word of mouth spreads.
Yeah, they do make that, like Flex was saying, kind of the Batman thing, where I guess he kind of has to do that. But I do like, and I'll stop talking after this because I know I'm sucking up a lot of oxygen, but I like how in sort of going into Act 3, Jin resorts to using the poison. And for me, as a player, of course, you don't get a lot of agency in these situations like we talked about earlier, like when you slaughter the Mongol leader, he's doing that to inspire the people of Yarikawa that he's fighting for them. And so you can kind of see like, okay, well maybe, he's building that legend like you were saying. But then when he goes to using poison, that to me, like as a player, I was like, this feels like a step too far. Like, and they really dramatize this poison, like this wolfsbane poison, like whenever he hits somebody with it, they start vomiting blood. Like they literally die in like this horrible way. I don't know if there's any real world poison that you would, if somebody put you with a blow dart, you would start vomiting your guts out. But like
It's like weaponized Ebola.
yeah, they made it this really like atrocious like form of fighting. And to me as a player, I felt like maybe that was going too far. But then after you complete that mission, you see that like they call it his gift to the enemy, which of course the whole thing is contrived, it's very fictionalized. But I thought from a narrative perspective, it was kind of neat that like they did start to push back and say, okay, well, if you're going to use these sort of like weapons of terror, like, well, then your enemy will start to use them on you. So
Right.
I like that dichotomy, and I do want to talk about the ending, but I don't want to keep rambling on right now. Like I've kind of had my long spiel about Jen.
Well, and I think that a lot of the themes of the early part of the game are, the idealism versus pragmatism, right? I mean, in a lot of ways, Shimuro's very idealistic, and in a lot of ways, Koten Khan's very, very very pragmatic. But
And Yuna as well. Yuna is probably
Right.
the character on the good side who is the pragmatic voice in Jin's ear.
yeah, and then as the game sort of continues, it really does explore that, okay, well, you can go too far, like I also as the player felt a little bit like, I think I'm committing biological warfare right now and I'm not okay with that. And then whenever you find out that the enemy is using this poison on, Jin's people, then that shows you the very real consequence of this sort of escalation of violence. I mean, and some people think it's kind of odd. Why do we have rules around war? Why do we have the Geneva Convention and yada yada yada? It's because if we didn't try to put some boundaries in some way, shape, or form, humans can get to a really dark place for what we do to one another really fast. And I kind of liked how the game had that sort of consequence for what Jin did. I mean, he basically got disowned by his uncle. He became a wanted figure, and then his people suffered because of his actions. So I liked that it did show you that you could take a step too far in that direction if you weren't fairly careful about what you were doing.
Yeah, I like that they portrayed, or that they that they did take those steps, because I actually thought until the end of Act 2 the story was pretty straightforward. Like I think they were doing a good enough job with everything they were trying to do, but I also found it was all very predictable in a way. And I think the end of Act 2 was the moment where it was like, okay, like I am interested in this story now. Like they have been willing to push Jin that far, and yeah, the whole arc of him using the poison, which felt like a step too far, and then the Mongols like learning from that and adopting that poison. I thought that was a really good kind of twist, or if you want to call it that, I don't know. Because yeah, like up until then, it was like Jin was doing a lot of the like, oh, I'm being stealthy and stabbing people in the back and being unhonorable, and it's like, but he was saving a lot of people as we talked about doing it. So it's like, that doesn't seem bad. He's
Yeah.
he's stabbing
It-
people
it-
in the back instead of the front. Like, he's still stabbing them to
And
save
it's-
people.
It's sort of a guerrilla tactic, and Jin does sort of represent like the defending nation, right? Like Jin is sort of the defending nation using guerrilla tactics. Like I guess you can argue about the honorableness of using defending tactics or of using guerrilla tactics anyway, but it's pretty common, right? Like if you're on the defensive and you have the home court advantage, like you're gonna
And you're
there's no-
outnumbered.
yeah, it's very like common to use that kind of like that kind
Yeah.
of tactic.
But yeah, I thought the whole poison thing was a good way to kind of ramp up the stakes, both in terms of, oh, now the enemies can do poison, but also that was where like the whatever you want to call it, the philosophical, moral, idealistic, whatever, like that became a more real concern of like,
Right.
this maybe was too far.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
I was going to say, in terms of all the consequences you guys already listed, another one that I wanted to add to the list was what happened to Taka. It almost feels like Jin is directly responsible for Taka's death, right? It's like, if it wasn't for me trying to, continue to encourage him to, do what he wants and help fight in the rebellion. If he hadn't done that, maybe Taka would still be alive.
Though Taka did want to fight, so like it's also
Yeah,
a little bit on Taka, and like Yuna was the one trying to be like, no, Taka sucks at fighting. He shouldn't be allowed to go do this. He'll die, and of course that's what happened. But
Yeah. So that, I mean, I think they did leave it open ended, and for me, I could totally see it like, okay, Taka's a grown man; he could do what he wants. But then Yuna also knew fully well that Taka is a complete wuss at fighting. So there was no way that he would make it out alive if he had been encouraged to continue to fight.
Yeah, and I can kind of see both sides of that. I feel like that the game could have gone one way or the other, but my best recollection of it was Khoten killed Taka, and maybe I should have been stronger about sending him away. But I didn't really feel a whole lot of regret from Jin, at least my recollection looking back. Maybe there was some lines and some dialogue in a scene that I'm just not remembering, but I feel like that, at least from the character's perspective, it was like, oh man, Taka's dead. That's real sad. But I don't really know how much he blamed himself for it. But I could be misremembering some of that too. But we get into Act 3 with an escape, right? So like, you were taken prisoner at the end of Act 2. You escape fairly quickly. And then they do that thing where, come on, they kill your horse. What, games, please stop killing the horse.
I wish Nate was still on the call, because he commented that to me. He was like, the second they made me name the horse, I knew they were going to kill the horse.
I know. And like, I get it, but still, come on, man. I don't remember what I named my horse, but it was very important to me at the time.
Yeah.
So important, you don't
they make
remember
you
what it
name
is.
the second horse that you get. And I'm like, what's the point? You're not the same as my first horse.
Yeah, so you get into Act 3, and you escape, but just barely. You almost die. Yuna saves you again. Feels very similar to the start of the game. And then you sort of start to build up the last force that you need to go and have your final confrontation. I mean, other than the story quest, I didn't do much of anything in Act 3, so I don't really know, other than, hey, go take this note over to the place that you just escaped from to let Lord Shimura know when to attack. And then, by the way, you go attack. I don't really remember too much out of Act 3 for as far as story pieces go. It didn't feel like that there was a ton there, like just from the actual main storyline perspective.
I mean, it was the shortest act, and yeah, all I remember is really just kind of finalizing the attack plans, like wrapping up loose ends, collecting your allies. And we haven't talked much about the allies, other than a little bit with the side quest, but I thought it was a pretty decent crop of characters that were you kind of rolled with, so to speak.
Yeah, it seemed like they were implying that the sensei Ishikawa also had done things that he was not proud of. Mm-hmm. It didn't quite fully connect with me exactly what was going on in terms of his backstory and the emperor or whatever, the lord at the time. But it made it sound like, oh, so you also did some things that you weren't proud of either. But yet you're lecturing me, about like doing the honorable thing.
Yeah, I feel like Ishikawa is the one that I connected with the least, and I think part of that was just taking away player agency when it comes to some of those conversations between Jin and the sensei. Because sensei's very much like he's kind of a jerk, but then Jin's kind of a jerk back to him, and then you like get into this like well you like he's done something wrong in his past, so who is he to lecture us? But you never quite know what he did, and I felt like there's just a little too much hostility, and there's not enough clarity on exactly what's going on there for me to really get a good feel. So every mission I had with him, it's like, hey, let's go yell at each other and then go fail to catch Tomoe again. Like,
They make it increasingly clear that Tomoe had a reason to lash out and hurt Ishikawa because he was a complete dick.
yeah. So, but the other characters, like Yuna was good, Kenji was good. I actually liked Masako. She was the lady whose family got killed fairly early on. Um, I thought that the game did a good job with her extended storyline as well, and I don't know, like everyone felt like that they fit in a pretty good way, even though theoretically you should have lost all of your support whenever you were arrested and branded a traitor. The game did just enough with those characters to make it feel realistic of why they're still sticking with you, which they could have whiffed on that, and they didn't. So I think that they did a good job there.
Yeah, they were all, and as I said before, Ishikawa was the only storyline I saw through, but I got the impression, this is definitely true for Ishikawa, and I got the impression all of them were like, had kind of like fallen from grace to some degree. Like they were all like a little bit of misfits and, not people who strictly followed the honor code. So like that probably shows how they were more willing to like, follow Jin even when he, wasn't being honorable. Because obviously Shimura or anyone like following the same kind of code as him would be more or less inclined to back Jin. But the kind of cast of allies he built up around him seemed like more open to different tactics or whatever.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, Flex, that those characters, and I didn't go late in some of the stories, but especially sort of your combat allies, Norio, Lady Adachi, and Ishikawa Sensei, they had all kind of lost everything, which is totally plausible during an invasion. And the fact that they had fought side by side with Jin, or maybe you helped them in a couple of side quests, you had to at least do one to recruit them, I think. So you kind of got the sense that if they had fought side by side with Jin, they would give him the benefit of the doubt. And I think he admitted to in Act 3, he's like, yeah, the poisonous cut, probably a bad idea.
Yeah.
There was also the storyline with the housekeeper. When they were gathering the poison, that was like I wasn't too into it, but it seemed like they were trying to sprinkle in some backstory between her and his father, and they were like maybe I got the sense that maybe the father had a relationship with her.
Yeah.
Do you guys get that sense?
Yeah, definitely. Like the sense that I got was that Jin's mother died. She sort of took up with him in a way that probably would have been frowned upon from the society at that time. Yeah, like as she was in her process of, I guess, passing away, there were definitely some lines of dialogue where she, she had confused Jin with Jin's father, and there was, there was some stuff there that made it at least pretty clear to me. I thought that there was a relationship there.
I thought that whole scene was fairly touching of like going back to Jin's home and like I don't know, it definitely had that sense of like, oh, he's returning home, he's kind of seeing his roots a little bit, but also a lot has changed and this woman's still there, but you know, a lot of other people aren't, and there's sadness. I think they did a good job with kind of the emotional through line of that segment, so to speak.
Yeah, I
and
really-
we'll get to the ending, I'm sure soon. But I think a lot of the like emotional family beats, I think they actually hit pretty well in this game. It's probably, for me, some of the story stuff that worked the best for me of Jin and his whole arc.
Yeah, and I was actually fairly touched by the very end of her storyline when she passed away. I think the game did a really a better job than what I think it had any right to for how it handled her frailty and her dementia and how that was playing out with her. You know, there in like the last moments where she wasn't sure whether she was next to Jen or next to Jen's father, and him recognizing that and then just being an emotional comfort and not trying to correct her or anything like that. You know, and then she passes away, and there's like this you know this sunset, I think it was, and you know, like, and the game's really pretty, but like they did a much better job of that than I really thought that they would, considering you know the amount of video game beats that we've been talking about. That one side quest with how they handled Jen's interaction with her and how she passed away at the end, I think was probably one of the high parts for the storytelling for me as far as all those side quests go.
Well, now I wish I had done that side quest.
It's not long. I mean, it's only like what 3 chapters maybe with her.
Yeah, I think it's after you have to do one to get the poison, and then there's like 2 or 3 after that, and they're pretty short.
Yeah,
So theoretically, she's still alive in your game. Flex.
Yeah, she's still hanging
So
around.
you didn't kill her by talking
By
to
helping
her.
her.
One little side thing about that as well, in addition to that, she also describes your Jen's father a little bit, which you don't hear about him very much at all. Like his biological father, who died when he was young, and it was interesting because she mentioned that he kind of butted heads with Shimura a little bit, and that she describes the scene where he chases down some bandits, and like apparently he was a really scary dude, which sort of parallels like Jin in the current day, that he's actually, and this is all happening around the time that Shimura is offering, or you know, he's already told you, he's like, hey, I want to adopt you. So if you do that side quest, you kind of see that like Jin is actually, his biological father was closer to who he is now in a way.
right.
I thought that was I did surprisingly like that quest line. I picked it up because it was just, you know, one of those little like to-dos, and I happened to be in the area, but yeah, it's funny how they pace some of that stuff out, because a lot of those little quote-unquote tales, I mean, they were kind of thematic and sort of like a Kurosawa cinema type way, like with the, but you know, they're kind of also sort of like filler side quests. A lot of them, I think.
Yeah. So, I guess we're getting to the very end now.
Yeah. I was about to say we can probably just go ahead and talk about the ending stuff. The main ending part I want to talk about is just the showdown with Shimura. But before that, just to comment that to me the fight with the last fight with Koten Khan was hilarious, because you're like running around that boat, and I was just throwing all of my ghost weapons, which I had basically maxed out at that point, and they let you, they didn't do it as a duel, so you could use your ghost weapons, and I was just throwing all my bombs and my shurikens, and I was just throwing everything at his face, and they had like a lot of pickups around that arena to like replenish those. So like I basically I got almost all of his health down, I think, just from throwing ghost weapons at him, which I thought was hilarious and also kind of fitting of like fully embracing the, like, you know, the shadier techniques, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, like that fight was very much a, hey, you're the ghost, go be the ghost. You know?
Yeah, I really like that they made that not a duel, because although I enjoyed the duels, I think it was fitting that was more like a 3-round. I like it when games like the Souls games, like their final boss is just kind of like a clean sort of quote unquote regular enemy and not some super monster with weird mechanics. Like, and this was very fitting, yeah, where it was like 2 or 3 rounds. He would call in allies to help him, but you could also just kind of fight him, like you said, head on using your full arsenal. And, you know, he was maybe a little tougher than some of the regular Mongol generals.
Yeah, but
And, you know,
it made you feel like a badass. You know, you just
Yeah.
unleashed everything, and then this is the pinnacle of what you've been working up until. You know, you started off like, you know, with just a sword, and you were pretty weak. So I really appreciate that. Okay, now I have, you know, total control. It's like, you know, you have the fully maxed out Samus armor. You know,
Right.
you've got everything. You can just unleash it on this dude that's been a pain in your side for the entire story.
Yeah. At least for me, like there was one minor complaint.
You're cutting out a little bit, Paul. I don't know if maybe you're too far away from your mic or.
Sorry. So what I was saying was like there was one minor complaint that I had, but it wasn't with the con fight. That one was fun. So after you finish fighting him, there's a little bit of story, and then there's a cutscene, and then you fight Shimura in a duel. So I didn't feel like the game really wanted me to do anything other than ride to the red tree, which you see several times, and then Shimura shows up and you duel him. Well, I didn't have any resolve left because I'd used it all up fighting Khan. And I did not think to go farm resolve because I honestly just didn't think about it. Like I was into that story, I was into that part of the game, and I'm like, all right, we're gonna go talk to Shimura, and I didn't know that I was gonna fight him. I guessed, but I didn't know it. You know, I'm like, oh, man, let's see how this ends. You know, and then it's like I got to duel him. I have 0 bubbles of resolve. And that guy was hard if you couldn't heal at all. I'm just to say that. Like it took me like 6 or 7 times to finally kill him. I wish that they either would have had you start that fight at full resolve or just given you some indication like, hey, just go find some Mongols and just go strangle them and then go on. But
Yeah,
like
I think just starting you at full health, full resolve would have been nice. I used my common armor was the armor that restored resolve quickly, so I was okay. But I agree that like they should just fill up your resolve going into that fight.
Well, and not just the final fight. I did notice that, especially for the duels, like, and just even just between fights in general, like the game, it wasn't a huge problem, especially on normal difficulty, but it didn't really auto regenerate some of that stuff out of combat. And yeah, you could walk into a duel. It wasn't that specific duel, like that didn't hit me from a gameplay perspective, but there were a couple of other like side quest duels I just kind of like wandered into with like no health to resolve, and it's like, man, this is like 10 times harder if you can't get hit like 3 times. Like,
right. Yeah.
so that is unfortunate that hit you, because I think you were saying like the story at that moment is, I think, really good.
Yeah, I think narratively, I did really like the way it ended because I'm glad they followed through on, like, up until that point they had done so much signaling of, like, as we've already talked about, of Shimura just being so locked into his samurai code, just so rigid and so unwilling to budge, that I think if they hadn't followed through and then like Shimura's like, all right, you've broken the samurai code, I have to duel you to the death. Like, I think if they had not followed through on that, that would have been dropping the ball. Like, I'm glad that they saw that arc all the way through. And I think it worked because they did so much of Shimura being proud of Jin at points of the story, wanting to adopt him, like all of that stuff. So I think that emotional arc worked really well. And then culminating in that, okay, we have very staunchly different ideals on how we wanted to handle this Mongol invasion, and by this rigid code that Shimura follows, they now have to duel to the death. Like, it's a little bit foreshadowed and maybe a little bit like, you know, heavy-handed in some way, but I think they also pulled it off well enough and like kind of did right by the themes of the game for that to be the final conflict. It worked for me,
Yeah.
is I guess what I'm saying.
It was a bit of a tragic story for Jin,
Yes.
right? Because he basically loses everything. He lost his parents, he lost his estate, and now he's going to lose his uncle. So I think it was a very fitting end cap to that story. And I'm curious what you guys decided to do. Did you spare him at the end after you beat him, or did you say,
Hell no, I killed
listen
him.
to him and then just completely end it?
He had his code. He knew what was coming. He lost the duel. He had to go.
And he asked for it. Like to Flex's point, I think that whole scene was set up really well because even though I guess there was some foreshadowing, like, I don't know, it was sort of this private meeting, and it starts off with sort of like a very civilized conversation, almost like a familial conversation. And I was, you kind of knew that Jin was an outlaw, and that, but I did not know, I wasn't 100% sure that Shimura was actually would want to fight him. I thought maybe he would be like, we were family, but I'm letting you off the hook. I never want to see you again. Like, I thought that was totally a possible outcome too. But like you said, Flex, and that was also a point where I think the haiku, before the duel, they have a moment where you compose a haiku. And I thought that was a nice gameplay tie-in. Like, even though, we've harped on how it was overdone in the open world, like, I thought it was kind of neat that they stuck that in right before the final boss, or the final duel. And it was very fitting. It was like we're composing the last words of like our clans. And then, you have the duel, and I chose not to spare him because he requested it. Like, and I actually thought, as gamey as that was as a decision, I thought it was set up well enough that was actually a meaningful decision. Like, that was a point where it was totally okay, I feel like, for the game to have this sort of binary, like, I don't know if you call it like a moral choice, but like, a lot of these are really like not good. They're like kind of silly choices, but I thought this was pretty meaningful because I don't know what the other side was. I chose to give him the warrior's death that he asked for. And like, it was a tough choice, like, cause he was your family, and like, you didn't have to kill him, like, but at the same time, there's this whole, like, if you didn't kill him, would he commit seppuku? Like, it would be a huge disgrace for him. Like,
would he like,
he would
still
bitterly
seek
hate
to
you.
come after you and like never let you really live in peace? Like, that was kind of my read on it. Is I don't know if that actually does happen if you spare him, but you are right, Ryan.
Am I the only one that? I think maybe I'm the only one that spared him then.
Well,
Paul, what did you do?
So the way that I saw it is, if you chose to kill him, then you were showing that you hadn't completely abandoned the samurai code, because that's what the samurai code demanded. If you chose to spare him, I think that would have been a much more difficult choice for him to accept, because your final act was to violate one of the most core tenets of the Bushido Code. So for me, it wasn't about whether or not do I kill my uncle. It's, do I allow him to die a samurai's death, or do I let him live in the disgrace knowing that I have rejected everything that there is that he represents? So I decided that he might have been a jerk, but he didn't quite deserve that. So I did kill him, but I thought that was the more merciful choice of the two. I thought it would have been way worse on his psyche if you would have spared him and then walked away, because that would have shown that you completely rejected everything he had taught you from the time that you were a kid.
Yeah.
I think that was that was kind of like the role playing mindset is that I just completely abandoned the old way and just spared his life because he was still kind of like the last living relative that you have left, and you're to flip back onto that kind of honorable code to me felt like it was going against what that narrative was trying to do, was that Jin kept on slipping away from what what Lord Shimura was teaching him at a young age.
Yeah, I agree with that. I actually think, I mean, to a point Ryan made, oftentimes these binary things can be pretty silly in games, but I think this one did work out very well because I think there's a lot that ties into the themes here, and that like I think there's I don't think there's a real right or wrong here, and they make it an appropriately like icky feeling choice. Like it kind of feels bad regardless. Like there's no happy ending here. Like it would have been easy for them to like make up and there be a happy ending, but like it's if you give him the honorable death he wants, he still dies. You still kill your uncle, and if you kind of follow Jin's transformation, like Alex said, and reject the samurai ways and let him live, then like there's all sorts of bad blood there, and like it's kind of icky no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, and I am curious. Like I really like the way they played it out because, he wanted the warrior's death, and Jin, he was happy. Like Jin gets down and I guess he pulls out his wakizashi or whatever, and he says, or his tanto, whatever it is, his short blade, and he says, I will make sure that they remember you as like, as like a wise father or a wise leader, and like a, as a father, and Shimura says, thank you, thank you, my son. So Shimura is kind of happy with that death, and of course Jen cries afterwards, but I think they played that really well. I am curious though, if you choose not to kill him, like that seems to me like it could be very bitter.
Yeah, do you remember what happens? Did they do much with that, Alex? Like, did they show much resolution from that?
I mean, he was clearly ashamed, but I think they did. He basically said, if you do this, you're never going to be safe. We're always going to be constantly coming after you. So in terms of Jin's the rest of his days, he's going to be an outlaw, and he's going to always be looking behind his back. He's gonna. It's a much more difficult path, right? So I think they kind of left it at that. They didn't really draw out the uncle's shame. It didn't really show what happened afterwards, but it kind of like seeded the possibility that you're basically going to be running for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and that's kind of the ending I would have guessed and or hoped for, like the one that would make sense of, yeah, Shimura is going to stick to his code and still be hunting Jin down for everything he's done.
Yep. Well, I think that's probably just about going to wrap it up for us. I very much enjoyed my time with Ghost of Tsushima. I am glad to see how much post-release support it's getting. They've added several features to the game. They're still adding stuff. I don't know if they've announced DLC for it or not. Do you guys know if they've actually announced anything, or is that just rumors and innuendo at this point?
I have not heard.
Yeah, I've not paid enough attention. I'm
But
sure
I
there will
feel
be a
like-
Ghost of Tsushima 2 someday, though.
Well, my best recollection was there were like 3 Mongol invasions of the island of Tsushima. Like I think they tried 2 more times, so that's 2 more games right there. But we'll see how those go. The game did get some enhancements on PS5, so if you haven't picked it up and you're wondering which version to get, just play it on the PlayStation 5. Play everything on the PlayStation 5. It's fine. And yeah, so I think that's probably going to about do it. So, big game, fun game. We were glad to be here to talk to you about it. And we're going to be back. We're all playing stuff eventually we'll get to the point to where we all play the same thing again, and we'll have another spoiler cast, and it'll be going up here on this channel. So keep an eye on it. And thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.